Marcus Thornfield, divorced and worn down from years in civil engineering work in Phoenix, inherited his grandfather Ezra Thornfield's expansive estate in Millbrook, Wisconsin. The property was substantial in both scale and legacy, 847 acres and 2.3 miles of shoreline along Crystal Lake. For 6 decades, Ezra had acted as an unofficial caretaker of this natural setting, hosting fish fries, allowing neighbors to borrow boats, and providing open access to the lake. These customs shaped the community's expectations, as if ownership and use were shared, even though legal title was privately held. Marcus, familiar with the property from summers spent learning about water rights and community traditions, returned to this environment with a clear awareness of its significance. His inheritance created a collision of perspectives: long-standing informal access granted by Ezra versus the precise rights now vested in Marcus as the legal owner. Brenda Hutchinson entered this picture as a newer resident, having moved from the Minneapolis suburbs 3 years earlier. Styling herself as Community Standards Director of Millbrook Shores, she projected HOA-like authority without any formal basis. With tennis whites, a BMW SUV, and Community First vanity plates, she sought to impose rules and fees. The central conflict was now set: Ezra's open-handed generosity against a rising attempt at control. Within a week of Marcus's arrival, Brenda appeared at his door with paperwork. The document was a 47-page community lake usage agreement, requiring a $12,000 annual maintenance fee. She claimed lake access functioned as an implied easement that now needed formal documentation, particularly because ownership had passed to an outsider. Marcus declined politely, stating he was still reviewing his grandfather's documents. The encounter marked the first official push for him to yield authority. Soon after, during a barbecue for 8 of his college friends, Brenda escalated. She walked onto the dock uninvited. Distributing laminated violation notices, she demanded a guest list, asserting she was enforcing community standards. Her actions disrupted the gathering, creating unease as neighbors observed the confrontation. A casual, friendly event ended abruptly, replaced by tension. The situation underscored the immediate shift from Ezra's permissive culture to Brenda's restrictive approach. Authority was being asserted without any legal framework, and social pressure compounded the intrusion. For Marcus, the evening's frustration transformed into determination. He resolved to examine his grandfather's paperwork in greater depth. The episode was not an isolated misunderstanding, but a sign of a broader conflict over ownership, authority, and community expectations. Marcus began searching his grandfather's study more thoroughly. Behind a bookshelf, he discovered a hidden panel. Inside was a cedar chest containing original land deeds, surveyor maps, and water rights documentation spanning decades. Among these, one document stood out with clarity: the Crystal Lake Water Rights Grant, 1923. This grant was signed, notarized, and filed with the county, giving Ezra and his heirs exclusive ownership of the entire lake. For Marcus, the significance was unmistakable. He was not only inheriting property with shoreline, but the full legal rights to the water body itself. His engineering background guided his interpretation. He knew that county courthouse records determined ownership, not informal claims or implied arrangements. With these documents, Brenda's assertions appeared to lack foundation. This discovery established the critical baseline for the unfolding conflict. The Thornfield family's exclusive rights to Crystal Lake had been documented for a century. Yet Marcus recognized that paperwork alone might not resolve disputes fueled by perception, community habits, and authority claimed without law. The evidence in the chest prepared him for challenges ahead. The conflict was no longer about inherited assumptions. It was grounded in a verifiable legal record. The following Monday, Marcus discovered an official-looking cease and desist letter under his truck's windshield wiper. The letterhead claimed to represent the Millbrook Shores HOA and asserted exclusive recreational rights to the waterfront. It threatened $500 daily fines for unauthorized lake use and was signed by Community Legal Services. The details raised suspicion. The letterhead listed only a P.O. box and the language lacked credibility. To Marcus, the document was clearly fabricated. Seeking clarity on what neighbors had been told, Marcus began visiting nearby residents. Mrs. Dorothy Kowalski, who had lived in the area since the late 1970s, recalled Ezra never charging fees in 6 decades. Brenda, she explained, had introduced the idea of proper management soon after arriving. Further confirmation came from Jim Brennan, a retired teacher. He revealed that Brenda had been collecting $200 per month from 23 families for more than 2 years, totaling about $5,000 monthly. These payments were framed as mandatory lake fees. The Henderson family represented how it worked in practice. They were paying $2,400 annually under the belief that community property required contributions. The scale of the operation was clear, contrasting long-standing openness with a pay-to-use system imposed by Brenda. Marcus took his questions to the county courthouse. With the help of Clerk Sandra, he reviewed the public records. The results were unambiguous. First, there was no legal record of any homeowners association named Millbrook Shores. No filings, no registration, and no authority. Second, Brenda's own deed showed her property was a standard residential lot without water rights. Third, Ezra's 1963 survey confirmed the Thornfield family's private ownership of Crystal Lake down to the waterline. Soon after, Marcus received a visit from Sheriff's Deputy Carson. The deputy explained that a complaint had been filed against Marcus, accusing him of harassment and property destruction. Marcus responded by presenting the courthouse documents. Deputy Carson reviewed them carefully, acknowledging the legitimacy of Marcus's ownership. Together, they approached Brenda, who tried to maintain her position by citing traditions of community sharing. However, when faced with the official records, her claims carried no legal weight. The episode revealed the difference between paperwork filed with the county and assertions presented by an individual. The matter was no longer private research. It had become a question of law enforcement recognizing documented authority. A flyer announced a community meeting on lake access and safety. About 34 households received invitations, though Marcus did not. At the meeting, Brenda addressed a full room. Her presentation included slides warning of overcrowding, potential liability, and declining property values. She argued that without professional management, accidents could threaten everyone's financial security. During the Q&A, Marcus stood to ask which authority granted Brenda management rights. He then distributed copies of the 1923 water rights grant, along with documentation showing that 3 other families also owned shoreline parcels. Residents studied the papers, some checking their own deeds. Murmurs spread as inconsistencies surfaced. Brenda attempted to counter by insisting that modern community standards outweighed historical property rights. She added that she had deposited $8,200 in a community maintenance account, portraying this as evidence of responsibility. Instead, the admission heightened scrutiny, since no formal HOA existed to authorize such collections. The meeting ended abruptly as Brenda left the room. In her absence, several residents questioned whether their fees had been legitimate. Some began asking directly about refunds. For many, the session marked the first time they saw evidence contradicting Brenda's portrayal of authority. Doubt had entered the community conversation. Surveyor stakes soon appeared around Marcus's shoreline. Not long after, he received mail from North Shore Development Consultants. The letter described a community enhancement project and encouraged him to join with local stakeholders. The proposal suggested his land was under review for broader recreational development. Marcus investigated further and discovered that Brenda had filed an application for community lake access improvement. In the filing, she listed herself as community representative. The proposed plans included expanding the boat launch, constructing a 40-car parking lot, and building seasonal rental cabins scattered along his shoreline. Attached to the application were more than 40 resident signatures. To understand the source, Marcus spoke with those listed. Many said they had signed petitions for unrelated issues, such as speedboat safety or lighting improvements, and had not been informed about development proposals. The signatures had been repurposed to imply support for far larger projects. At the township office, a clerk confirmed that no permit, no HOA registration, and no insurance coverage had been filed to legitimize Brenda's initiatives. The P.O. box used for correspondence matched the one from the earlier cease and desist letter. The application represented an escalation, expanding the dispute from access and fees to proposed development. Local media coverage soon appeared under the headline, "Community Seeks Compromise on Lake Access Dispute." The article featured a quote from an anonymous longtime resident, suggesting that some newcomers did not understand small-town values. It also included a photo pairing Marcus's no trespassing signs with children near the shoreline, framing the dispute as generational and cultural. Meanwhile, rumors circulated widely. Residents were told Marcus planned to fence the shoreline, charge admission, and prohibit children from swimming. These claims generated unease, particularly among newer families who had accepted prior statements from Brenda without question. The township office provided an important counterpoint. Officials noted there were no permits filed for any of Brenda's initiatives, no HOA registered in Millbrook Shores, and no insurance coverage for claimed activities. Yet misinformation carried weight, especially when tied to concerns about safety. One particularly potent rumor suggested Marcus might block emergency boat access, potentially preventing rescue efforts in a drowning situation. This claim, attributed to Brenda, spread quickly. The impact was visible when a young child from the Henderson family asked Marcus directly if it was true. The emotional effect demonstrated how reputational pressure and safety narratives were shaping perceptions. Marcus eventually returned to the cedar chest for a closer review of its contents. Inside, he discovered correspondence and official documents that shifted the context of the entire dispute. In 1999, Crystal Lake had been designated a critical watershed protection zone, with Ezra formally recognized as the steward. The designation meant development around the shoreline triggered federal oversight. Financial records revealed that the state had been paying Ezra $47,000 annually for conservation management for roughly 2 decades. In 2015, Ezra established the Crystal Lake Environmental Trust, naming Marcus as beneficiary. The trust contained $340,000 in accumulated conservation funds and guaranteed ongoing payments to support the lake's ecological health. Additional documents detailed the environmental significance of the lake, including endangered freshwater mussels and native trout populations. Regulations required environmental reviews for any construction within 500 feet of the shoreline, making Brenda's development plans non-compliant by default. Perhaps most importantly, the trust spelled out stewardship obligations. Public access had to be maintained for educational and recreational purposes, but without management fees or private collection schemes. Marcus consulted attorney Rebecca Storm, who confirmed that the legal framework provided robust protection. Any development attempt would invite federal review, and Brenda's actions risked exposure as fraudulent. With attorney Rebecca Storm, Marcus and supportive neighbors developed a structured strategy. The first prong focused on environmental protection. A formal notification was sent to the Environmental Protection Agency about unauthorized development attempts within a protected watershed. Such notices typically trigger federal investigation and oversight. The second prong addressed fraud documentation. Jim Brennan and Dorothy Kowalski began recording conversations with neighbors, compiling accounts of how Brenda presented her fees. Wisconsin's one-party consent law allowed these recordings to serve as evidence. Sarah Chen, owner of a local restaurant, documented discussions where Brenda referenced lake management as a profitable opportunity. Rebecca issued subpoenas for bank records to track fee collections. The third prong offered the community a legitimate alternative. Marcus announced the Crystal Lake Heritage Festival, scheduled for July 4th, funded entirely by the Conservation Trust. Infrastructure upgrades, including safety lighting, professional dock repairs, and completion of an ADA-compliant fishing pier were implemented. Public sessions on HOA law and property rights were organized with Rebecca as speaker. The communications effect was significant. Media coverage shifted toward conservation programming, supported by official permits and liability insurance. Marcus's image transitioned from outsider to responsible steward, reframing the conflict around facts and lawful alternatives instead of rumor and assertion. As planning advanced, counter-moves emerged. Marcus discovered his dock lights unplugged and a life ring station relocated. Forged signs appeared around his shoreline reading, "No swimming by order of Millbrook Township." The signs carried false official markings. Online, a social media campaign portrayed Marcus as restricting access. Photos were posted showing him removing the forged signs, edited to suggest he was dismantling legitimate safety notices. The posts were widely shared, leading to confusion. Some volunteers withdrew from festival planning under rumor pressure. The turning point came with a direct offer. Brenda visited Marcus in person, suggesting a compromise. On recording, she proposed giving Marcus 30% of collected management fees if he signed a property use agreement. She admitted the development application served only as leverage. The recording captured both the offer and acknowledgement of her scheme. Investigators connected additional evidence. Financial records revealed two accounts. One main collection fund totaling $14,700 and another labeled Lake Development Reserve Fund, holding $8,200. Transfers crossed state lines, escalating the issue into potential wire fraud. Trail cameras installed by Marcus later recorded Brenda removing one of the devices, creating possible obstruction of justice implications. These elements strengthened the evidence base, shifting the dispute from local tension toward federal concern. The Crystal Lake Heritage Festival drew more than 200 attendees. Volunteer stations presented environmental education exhibits, while food trucks, a high school jazz band, and a new wheelchair-accessible pier reflected Conservation Trust funding. Liability insurance and township permits had been secured. Brenda arrived with several supporters, demanding permits and insurance documents. She presented a laminated badge and a forged HOA registration certificate, asserting authority to shut down the gathering. Marcus responded by producing the official permits and coverage, then displayed on a large screen the 1923 water rights grant, the conservation designation, and the trust documents. An EPA official, Agent Rodriguez, confirmed the watershed's protected status. The presentation established that lake ownership and stewardship obligations rested entirely with Marcus, supported by federal designation. As tension built, Sheriff's Deputy Martinez stepped forward. He announced that an FBI warrant had been issued for Brenda's arrest. The charges included wire fraud, mail fraud, forgery of government documents, and obstruction of a federal investigation. In front of residents and news cameras, she was taken into custody. The festival continued afterward, shifting attention back to community programming. The moment publicly clarified ownership and authority, while reinforcing conservation commitments that directly contrasted with the failed fraudulent claims. Following her arrest, Brenda entered a plea agreement. She admitted guilt to 3 felony fraud charges and agreed to pay $47,000 in restitution to affected residents. A civil suit brought by Marcus and other neighbors resulted in an additional settlement of $75,000, along with a permanent restraining order. She was also required to issue a public apology, published in the regional newspaper. Restitution was distributed among families who had paid fees, with interest calculated from their first payments. Residents who had lost thousands of dollars were reimbursed. The process helped repair strained trust within the neighborhood. On the property itself, restoration advanced quickly. Vandalism damage was repaired, the accessible fishing pier was completed with code-compliant handrails, and a new security system was installed to monitor the grounds. These measures ensured both safety and stability for future use. Brenda sold her house to cover legal obligations. Social consequences followed as well, with family ties disrupted and community support withdrawn. For Marcus, the resolution represented closure on the dispute and confirmation of the stewardship responsibilities he inherited. The focus could now shift from defending ownership to managing resources constructively. In the months after the dispute, the community redirected its energy toward stewardship. The Crystal Lake Community Council was formed, with elected representatives guiding shared activities. Monthly watershed workshops became standard, while children's nature programs introduced environmental education to younger generations. The annual festival, now institutionalized, drew regional visitors and boosted local businesses. Sarah Chen's restaurant reported a 25% increase in revenue during festival weekends. Partnerships expanded the impact. The University of Wisconsin established a field research station at the lake, monitoring recovery of trout populations, which rose by 40% in the first year. Invasive species removal and native plant restoration advanced, guided by professional input. At the state level, the Wisconsin Attorney General used the case as an example in HOA fraud prevention programs. The legislature passed the Community Conservation Protection Act, strengthening oversight of association formation. Federally, Crystal Lake became a recognized model for watershed protection and community-based stewardship. The story was featured in a PBS documentary, and Marcus spoke at property rights seminars across multiple states. The trust's funding positioned the community to acquire additional watershed properties. Interest from 3 neighboring counties indicated broader application of the model. New development pressure from a casino resort emerged but was noted as a challenge for the future.